Do you want to hear a horror story? Okay, here's one. In the beginning, once upon a time, there was a king who lost his wife. To get over this tragedy, he married a woman whose heart was so cold it could freeze hell over. This lady had two daughters, Snow White and Rose Red, whose beauty knew no bounds, and she wanted them to be the envy of everyone, especially her husband's deceased legitimate daughter, Ella, who was known as Cinderella. She forced Cinderella to do all the housework while they lounged around doing nothing. But this wasn't enough. She also wanted to dress Cinderella up in rags so that her stepdaughters would always outshine her. One day, the king announced that a great ball would be held in the kingdom and every eligible young lady was invited. Cinderella longed to go, but when she asked her stepmother if she could attend, she was refused. Instead, Cinderella was told to stay home and clean up the mess after the party. Devastated, Cinderella retreated to her room, where she cried non-stop until a mouse came up to her and said, "Why are you crying?" Startled, Cinderella explained her situation. The mouse said, "Don't worry, little one. I'll tell my queen what happened and we'll see if we can help you." Then the mouse ran away. Soon enough, the mouse returned with a group of mice. "You must come with me right now," they said. Cinderella was confused, but followed them anyway. They led her to a field outside the city, where they all began to dig a hole. Cinderella understood they were building a tunnel to her late mother's grave. There, the Queen Mouse lived, and when she heard what had happened, she summoned all the animals in the forest to aid Cinderella. They cleaned her up and made her a beautiful gown out of flowers. Then they piled her into a pumpkin carriage and surrounded her with mice that were made into horses. After bidding them farewell, Cinderella arrived at the palace just in time for the party. There, she attracted the attention of the prince, who asked her to dance. The two of them enjoyed themselves so much that Cinderella forgot she had to leave at midnight. Suddenly, the clock struck 12. Startled, Cinderella fled, losing one of her golden slippers in the process. The prince found it and instantly fell in love with it. He sent men all across the land searching for its owner, eventually finding Cinderella. She tried to refuse his advances, but he insisted on marrying her because the slipper fit her perfectly. All the while, her stepmother and stepsisters looked on, seething with jealousy. But wait, before we continue, I think we all know this story. You probably heard it when you were younger. We're all familiar with Disney's version or some other animated retelling of Cinderella. But what if I told you that the version most people know is just a tiny fragment of the original tale? The one usually told to children is a sanitized adaptation that removed the original tale's most horrific and gruesome elements. In fact, the story we all know and love has its roots in an ancient oral tradition of stories about a mistreated girl who attends a royal ball, meets a prince, and then flees, leaving behind one of her golden rings instead of a shoe. Those details were added later by authors over time. The most famous retelling of the Cinderella story was most famously collected by the brothers Grimm, who included it in their book, Grimm's Fairy Tales, published in 1812. Their version was based on a story told to them by Dorothy Pearson Veman, the daughter of a former servant who heard it during her time in the royal household of the King of Prussia. And Grimm's version is definitely not your average story of magic and talking mice. It's a dark and brutal lesson in justice. In the Grimm version, the magical help does not come from a fairy godmother, but from a wish-granting tree that grows from Cinderella's mother's grave, where the spirit of her mother lives on. The famous shoe is not made of glass, a poetic addition by the French author Charles Perrault, but is a golden slipper that the prince uses to find her. The prince comes across the shoe and becomes enamored with it. So enamored, in fact, that he recruits two courtiers to help him carry it around as he goes in search of her. The slipper fits perfectly, but the wicked stepsisters, in their desperation, are given a cruel idea by their mother. They hack off the toes and heels of their feet and attempt to fit their feet into the golden slipper. When this fails, the stepsisters take it a step further. The older stepsister cuts off her own big toe to make her foot fit into the golden slipper. The prince, blinded by love, doesn't notice anything amiss and believes he has found his bride. As she walks to the prince, two doves that perched on the tree call out to him, saying, "Look, look, there's blood in the shoe. The shoe is too tight. The true bride waits for you at home." Still ignoring these warnings, the prince returns her to the stepmother and demands to try the shoe on the other sister. Desperate to become the princess, the younger stepsister cuts off a piece of her own heel to make her foot fit. But the doves again expose the deception, calling out to the prince that there is blood in the shoe, and he returns the second sister in disgust. Finally, the prince tries the shoe on Cinderella, and it fits perfectly. Now understanding what a fraud his fiancée had been, the prince is filled with shame. He takes Cinderella to the tree to ask for her hand in marriage, but she refuses, saying she only wishes for her late mother to be taken out of the grave and placed in a proper coffin. The doves understood and went to work carrying the coffin away. Overjoyed to have her mother's remains treated with respect, Cinderella accepts the prince's proposal, and the two are wed. Now, the doves return to the tree, which bears fruit that tastes like sweet marzipan. Cinderella is allowed to eat the fruit without any ill effects, but the stepsisters are driven insane by its taste and fall to the ground screaming and gnashing their teeth. The final, gruesome act of the story is an act of revenge, not reconciliation. On Cinderella's wedding day, as the stepsisters try to win back her favor, the two doves fly down from the heavens. In a final, brutal show of justice, the doves peck out the eyes of both stepsisters, leaving them blind for the rest of their lives. So this story isn't about happily ever after. It's a story of divine retribution and a moral lesson that crime and deception will be punished, and that the vengeance will be swift and cruel. It's a story of blood and family, of how jealous stepmothers and stepsisters will destroy themselves to inherit their rivals' beauty and status. In the original tale, Cinderella's slipper doesn't fit her stepsisters because she's literally the only person in the kingdom whose blood matches her late mother. The doves aren't trying to warn off the prince. They are the embodiment of Cinderella's mother, watching over her daughter and waiting for the moment when they can finally take revenge on those who wronged her. So why do we tell kids a version of this story where the stepsisters are given a second chance and everyone ends up happy? Well, Stories change with the times and reflect the fears and morals of the generations that tell them. Grimm's fairy tales was originally intended for adults. It reflected the turbulent social anxieties of the 19th century, a time when blood and lineage were everything. If you didn't have the right blood, you could never truly succeed. Even if you were impossibly beautiful, you couldn't escape the consequences of your bloodline. This is why Cinderella is desperate to go to the ball. She wants to catch the eye of the prince so she can better her station in life and lift the curse on her and her family. When we sanitize these stories, we lose sight of the morals that drove them in the first place. And what's more, we don't often talk about the violence that runs rampant through fairy tales. In Grimm's version of Cinderella, there is mutilation, dismemberment, blinding, torture, and death. Even the version most of us know has its fair share of violence. Cinderella loses her father at the start of the story. Her stepmother and stepsisters treat her like a slave. And even though she escapes, she is still forced to chop off part of her heel to make the shoe fit. These violent acts are not put in there for shock value, but to drive home the moral of the story. Cinderella's stepsisters are consumed by their own vanity. They are willing to disfigure themselves to become princess. This is the ultimate expression of evil. It's the reason the doves are needed. They represent the voice of reason that has been silenced by Cinderella's stepmother. They are there to guide Cinderella and protect her from her enemies. We should never forget that fairy tales have their roots in the oral tradition of storytelling, something passed down through generations and adapted along the way. As society changes, our morals and beliefs change. Stories evolve to reflect that. The fairy tales we read today are not the same as the ones our parents read, and they will change again as the years go by. Thank you for watching.